No one was ever convicted of the murders of Harry and Harriet Moore on Christmas night, 1951, though it seems just about everybody knew the KKK members who bombed their home. Harry and Harriet, as the song says, have both been active in the NAACP. In fact, Harry was the state president. But white men who assumed authority over black bodies took their lives. And by allowing them to go free, society itself declared that when white people decided, they were free even to kill black people who challenged the status quo. Over the years, progress has certainly been made, but still some white people assume authority over black bodies, and there remains much work to be done. To talk about racial justice in our valley and think about what comes next, I'm pleased to be joined this morning by Roy Tatum, who's president of the East Valley NAACP, among a lot of other things he's up to. Roy, welcome back to VUU. Help me welcome Roy. So
it is, Pat.
Yeah, they knew you were going to be here. It's good to have you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, it's an honor. So we'll just get right into it.
Okay.
You and I have talked a little bit about your work in policing.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can talk about what you're seeing and just in general what you're up to when it comes to policing.
Okay. Before I get into that, I want to appreciate the song for Harry and Henrietta Moore. I know it existed. I don't know that I've ever heard it sung, though.
Oh, yeah.
To be frank. So I appreciate you invoking their legacy and their memory. And if I may, just take a quick liberty to say that they were vigorously registering people to vote and encouraging people to vote and participate in the political process. And in many counties in the South, the black population was significant. And while they were registering people to vote and the numbers of black people were significant, there was a very small number of people registered to vote. So they were making some noise. Mm-hmm. And as you talked about authority, black people were beginning, and this is before Brown versus the Board of Education. This is before Emmett Till. This is 51, as you talked about. Yeah. So they were progressive and revolutionary and brave and courageous down in Florida. So I just want to put that out there, what their work was for those that have never heard about who Harry and Henrietta Moore were.
And when I hear you talk about that, I think of the sort of the sweep of American history. Yeah. And there was this window during Reconstruction where we could have been 100 years before they were killed almost. We could have been much further along the path, but assumed authority over black bodies into the Reconstruction era and got us to Jim Crow and all that. So, it's sort of a tragic story.
There's a lot to talk about as it relates to Reconstruction, which I think will tie into the conversation around policing, because Reconstruction only lasted 7 years. You know, what we're talking about is Reconstruction was the period after the Confederate Army conceded and the Union, they were trying to put the Union back together, but now you had 4 million free, enslaved Africans now in society. Yeah. So what happens? Now you've been at this point in time, you have enslaved people who were born into slavery. So it's like that's all they knew. Yeah. So to now say you're free, what's that mean? Yeah. Where do you go? Okay, I'm free. All right, now what? My former slave master's now gonna be like, oh yeah, you're free, so let me let you in. No, that didn't happen. Yeah. When the Confederate soldiers returned, to their those that did return to their plantations, and I don't know any better way to say this, but black people caught hell. Yeah. When the Confederate soldiers returned, and so to me, this is the precursor to what we see as the treatment of black people when we see law enforcement.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
Yeah, so talk about that and what's going on in the East Valley and what your work is.
Well, I will say, I think, and maybe, some people may jump on me for saying this, but I think things have improved given where we were.
Yeah, right.
Given where we were. Many people still don't realize that in 2018, the city of Phoenix was number one in the nation for the use of lethal force at the hands of a police officer, which meant you were more likely to get killed in Phoenix by the police than you were in New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, Chicago, Miami, Seattle, But Phoenix was number one. And areas and the community, the police community is not far removed. I mean, it's tight-knit. So Mesa, you were more likely to be profiled in Mesa, Arizona, than you would be Baltimore, Maryland, or even Ferguson. Mm-hmm. So they didn't like me when we presented that, and that made it into the USA Today. It's true. But the reality was, it forced a conversation. Many people will say, why now? Why bring all this up now? We're making progress. We're getting along. We are, aren't things better, as a society? And I think, when you really take an honest look at society, you can say things are better as there are no colored people only signs or whites only signs but at the same time, this is my generation, our generation, may be the first generation to be able to address white supremacy and injustice, racial injustice, without direct physical retribution and consequence. Yeah. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Like, my parents and your parents knew segregation at some point in time, whether it was segregated schools or segregated buses, but I never knew that. So I'm entitled now, I mean, I'm sorry. I grew up in an area where it was pretty diverse. So I don't know what it's like to be discriminated against overtly, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when I see, so many of us now, when we see injustice, when we see like blatant, like right now there's a young man or a couple of young men who have dreadlocks, who are high school seniors, who are being denied graduating. Like they completed classes, like they made grades. I don't know what their grades were, but nonetheless, they qualified to graduate, but because of their hair, they're being refused or denied to participate in the graduation celebration. That's discrimination.
Yeah, so how do you see that? Do you see that as, I think of it as policing black bodies. I mean, that's sort of how I think, and assuming that the sort of standards that we've had for young white men forever should just be lifted on to people of color. I wonder how you see that issue.
Well, I will say this.
These aren't the questions I told you I was going to ask you.
I know, but it's fine. We're letting the spirit move. But what we've seen a double standard. Yeah. We've seen a double standard in society. I can give a personal anecdote to this, a story to this. At some point in time, I mean, I played sports and I was pretty good athletically, and everybody was like, you got a 2.5 GPA, which is like a C+, so to speak. And that's all they said to us was, you got a 2.5, you got 2.5. And so and this is high school, and so as colleges now begin to look at me to say, hey, we want you to come to our college, play football, and I'm going on these recruiting trips, I'm going to these campuses. And then, I mean, it's fun until you sit down with the college academic, counselor or advisor, and they're going over your grades, and they say, well, we require you to have a 3.0, And some of us had 2.5 on the dot. I probably had like a 2.8, you know. And I said, man, I want to go to this college, or I'm looking to go to college. So I honestly started taking my school seriously and started reading and really started applying myself, if I may say that. But and there was this one semester, my senior year, there was an article that came out around athletes with good grades. And I was like number 2 on the list with a 3.7. And I'm saying this to say, after that, there were teachers that accused me of cheating. I'm serious. This is a true story. And I mean, you know, I'm young and I'm cocky. I didn't care. I didn't know I was being discriminated against. So some teachers made me take tests in front of them, like right there, like moved me to the front, and I'm, you know, like doing it. Here you go. You know, and I walk out of class like George Jefferson. Because, and some of them couldn't believe it, you know, because it was like the expectation was just to excel on the athletic field, but only minimum in the classroom. My point, I'm saying that to say, whatever expectations people have of you, that's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And so if the police think that we're the boys in the hood, or the menace of society, you know, or gangbangers, drug dealers, and rappers, so to speak. And not to say that rappers are bad. Some rappers come from amazing families and, you know, incredible backgrounds. They just explain what's going on in the hood, so to speak. So if that's what they're expecting, that's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And so therefore, they've weaponized black skin.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I told that story all the way just to say the expectation sometimes is low or nefarious, and that's what you see. You know, like if, for instance, I was watching, what was the movie? Django Unchained. Yeah. You know, and at that time, I mean, Quentin Tarantino, I love Quentin Tarantino's work because it's raw. But there was like, I mean, for all intents and purposes, only like one good white man in the movie. You know, so if you're being real, if we were to take the flip side of that and to say all white men or all white people were racist, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Then, you know, you got to think about that. So all black people, no, all black people aren't thugs, and all white people aren't racist.
Yeah, it's hard. I think it's hard for people to hold in their minds diversity within diversity within diversity, and you can't. The blanket assumptions that we make based on where you were raised, or the color of your skin, or whatever, usually don't hold.
Right.
Yeah. So, I want to ask you, what can a room full of people who are big-hearted and really interested in making things better, what can they do when it comes to racism and policing, particularly in the East Valley, where most of us live?
What I'd like to say first, I want to address that. But what came to me, and as I'm thinking about what you wanted to talk about, I think when addressing white supremacy, you've got to address the roots of it. You got to address the family structure of it. Like white supremacy and white racism was a family affair. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like the Ku Klux Klan were not just these crazy, you know, backwards, toothless white people. You know, the Ku Klux Klan were bankers, lawyers, politicians, sheriffs, police, teachers. You know, they wore hoods so you couldn't tell who they were, so they could go out and, you know, teach your children tomorrow, so to speak. Yeah. So my point is, if there was a night ride, Harry and Harrietta Moore, obviously their home was bombed. If you didn't catch the song, their home was bombed on Christmas night. Yeah. So any woman in here, if your man's leaving in the middle of the night on Christmas night, where's he going? I mean, you get what I'm saying? So it's a family affair. You know where he's going. You know where he's going.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You know what he's like, yeah, you know, it's around 11, I gotta go. Like, Christmas, where you going? You know what he's doing. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So to act oblivious. So for people to say, I can't believe that this is the country that we live in. It's like, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Like, what you think has been happening? And so, and I make light of that, but I got to make light of it because it's heavy to think that that's the reality of where we are. That's the reality of the country. That's the reality of how unfortunately, we're seeing a resurgence of white supremacy and white supremacist ideologies kick back up in the East Valley in particular. Because, and why? Why? Is it because population growth? Is it because populations are changing? Is it because, there's more people, there's being held some accountability now? And I think many white people don't understand what their role is at this point in time, given the history. You can't do anything to change the history. Here's my thing. The history is the history. But when you hear something that's not right. When you see somebody going down the wrong road. When things kind of go too far. Like, I know growing up, I had friends that liked to fight. They liked to start stuff. And like I don't know why, but they just enjoyed that sometimes, disrupting, in a negative way. And whenever they got to that point, it's like, okay, no, you got to go. Stop. It's time to, because you knew where that was going. And so now, I don't know how the racist conversations start. I don't know. I've never been in one,
No, that surprises me.
But my point is, many times, it was black success that warranted or that generated the white rage. Mm-hmm. It was like, this black man got this land. Why he got that land? Why he got that tractor? Why does he have that donkey? Or why does he have a new car? It's like, what? So to me, that's something they got to check. You got to check in yourself.
Well, and that's what I mean when I talk about the assumption of authority over black bodies that white people in some ways are acculturated to assume in our society that there's a book, Hochschild, I think is the name of the author, who talks about the last election, and she sort of sees a line of white people who were sort of going up the hill, and the good stuff was at the end of that hill, and they're standing in line to go over that hill and get the good stuff. And around them come successful black families, the Obamas, for example, and others. And the assumption of the white people in that line to get the good stuff was, hey, we were first in line. And why should people of color be allowed to pass us? I think that that's sort of the shameful heritage, really, of the Civil War and slavery, and it just continues into today. Yeah.
I think about, as you were telling the story of the children, the children's story, and it said, my mother's a janitor, and I love her. Made me think about my grandmother, because my grandmother served, she worked in the cafeteria at Old Dominion University, and, low wages, but a modest lifestyle, but good people. And, the thing is, when we talk about the role, I also want to address the role of capitalism and materialism. And there are some people that have come to America, land of opportunity, particularly your European immigrant that will come to America, the land of opportunity, right? And all these stories that come out about how you can make yourself anything you want to be. So what's the reason for a poor white person? So when a white person finds themselves poor or needy or without, and they see a black and they know that this is the land of opportunity, and it seems like when they see a black person progressing, it's like, hold on, they're beneath me. Mm-hmm. And that's the philosophy. I mean, people can say, oh, that's not how I think. It's not about how you think. It's about the philosophy that was, that grew America and second-class citizens. And so when you see a second-class citizen in a Cadillac, it's like, oh, it makes you you got to reevaluate now. Like,
yeah.
well, maybe they're not second-class citizens. How they got a Cadillac and I got an old Dodge?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the challenges in that situation is if people can have a conversation partner who doesn't drive them further into that opinion. You know what I mean? Who says, tell me why you think that. That's interesting. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but I just think that right now we're sort of hollering at each other from our different positions. And what really needs to happen, I think, is conversations between people who really want to change and people who want things to get better.
I think that's absolutely correct. I remember having a conversation and a person, with a white male, and he was telling me how he was not racist and how he knew, he talked about the music that he listened to, and some of his favorite movies had black actors and his favorite athletes, and I'm like, okay. All right. But then I just simply said, how many black people have you had dinner with at your house? It went just like that.
Yeah.
And it made him think, And I'm like, so yeah, you have this admiration for, and most of us, of course, I love Michael Jordan. Who doesn't love Michael Jordan? Unless you were like a Detroit Pistons or Indiana Pacers.
Well, the truth is hard sometimes.
But my point is like, of course, the best of us in any genre, you're like, oh yeah, I'm a fan too, right? But that common person, I believe as Jesus said, it's how you treat the least of these, So, it's just about checking yourself on a micro level. Of course, you're going to love the high-level artist, actor, sports athlete. But what about if you've got a black person living in your community and you've never said hi or never, extended yourself to them, then what's that about?
Wait, are you telling me it's not enough just to read Ta-Nehisi Coates?
No. Not according to Cornel West.
Yeah, I hear you.
Dr. West, Dr. West is one of my mentors.
Yeah.
So I want you to read Dr. West.
Yeah,
I like Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah.
I don't want to start nothing.
So when we have lunch together, we have an hour, sometimes 90 minutes, but we don't have that this morning.
Right.
So
okay. Right.
I'm going to let you pick the last topic. Do you want to talk about reparations, or do you want to talk about Dr. King's legacy?
Oh, we got to talk about Dr. King because I think reparations goes into that.
Okay.
As we celebrate Dr. King's 91st birthday, January 15th, 2020, unfortunately, there's been a ton of commercialization and a watered down version of Dr. King's message. Meaning, when you ask an average everyday person what they know about Martin Luther King, they'll immediately go to "I Have a Dream," which was 1963. And even in the "I Have a Dream" speech, there's a portion in there where Dr. King says, "America has given the Negro a bad check." Mm-hmm. It's like, whoa.
And the rest of that is what we're coming to collect on?
We're coming to collect. Yeah. Meaning that he understood that there were a number of government-funded programs that were supporting the growth of Caucasian Americans for land. We're talking about the Homestead Act, to where you could go and travel and get land from the government. You can get financial support to farm the land. You can get education funded by the government to learn how to farm. And if it didn't work out, you can get some extension on some loans until your land became productive. All government funded. And all in the government promised, the free slaves back to the Reconstruction, at least 40 acres and a mule, under Proposition 15, William Tecumseh Sherman, I'm just giving y'all that because that's in case somebody doesn't believe me. You can look it up. And that never came to fruition, so to speak. And so Dr. King, in his last years, Dr. King was a disruptor from the beginning. And a lot of people don't realize that. He wasn't just some little peaceful man that wanted everybody to get along. Yes, he believed in nonviolent protest and nonviolent resistance, but it was to prove a point as a strategy and a tactic. But in the latter years of his life, he went from civil rights to a peace activist, meaning he was against the war in Vietnam, and many people believe that was the position that ultimately cost him his life. And then he moved over to economic justice. And I believe, and many people believe, that Dr. King's philosophy of truly, fully integrating was shifting to, look, if we can't get along, if this is going to continue to be violent for black people, let us get enough economic resources to go do our own thing or build our own communities. Dr. King was shifting to that. And so Dr. King was talking about the guaranteed annual income because even then, in the 60s, jobs were shifting. Manual labor wasn't needed as much as technology advanced. So Dr. King was revolutionary in his views on economics and on his views on being anti-war. And Dr. King created enemies. I believe Dr. King created more enemies than he knew he was creating with the military and industrial complex and also in the halls of power of small business and big business. Because in his last speech, Dr. King said, don't buy Wonder Bread, Seal Test Milk, and Coca-Cola. The owner of Coca-Cola, the CEO of Coca-Cola at the time was the richest man in Georgia. So and everybody heard this, and people were ready to mobilize on these nationwide boycotts. And Dr. King was about to, I think he was on to great things with the Poor People's Campaign by uniting poor people. And this was across color lines. This wasn't just black poor people. This was white poor people, Latinos poor people, because he was also reaching out to Cesar Chavez.
Yeah, so at the end, King's vision is more expansive and inclusive, and it's something that we can tap into, whether it's economic or racial justice alone or whatever. Well, thank you, Roy, for being here. And
thank you.
Can you hang out after in case folks want to talk?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I got some
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you all.